Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 163.
On today's show, we have another Timelines episode, and this time we're looking at what happened in 1100 CE, specifically in North America.
Let's dig a little deeper into North America. Into a mound. No, don't dig into mounds.
No, don't do that.
Welcome to the show, everyone. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Sitting here on a chilly, rainy day, and, well, I say San Luis Obispo, California, but it's really like Avila Beach. We're closer to there.
Yeah, technically the address is San Luis Obispo, though.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
but the ocean's like 3 miles behind us.
It is, and it's like the first kind of nasty day we've had since we got here. Felt pretty lucky. The weather's been really nice.
Yeah, I don't know what it would have been like to be here prehistorically. It just like never would have left because I mean the temperature is it's always the same.
Yeah,
you know, it's never like super freezing cold. It's never like really hot.
Yeah,
it's always within the same 20-30 degree temperature range.
Yep,
like all year round.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it's perfect for succulents.
Yeah,
there's the biggest prickly pear I've ever seen growing out behind us.
I know. Yep. Back around 1100 AD, it would have been really nice place to be, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Although that's not one of the places we're talking about today.
Right. So our timeline series, for those that are possibly new to the show, first off, welcome.
Yes.
This is the Archaeology Show. We have a lot of episodes for you to go back and listen to.
Yeah, definitely.
And the show has changed over the years too, by the way. So, you know.
Yeah. If you start at the very beginning, that's before I was here. Yeah. So just like fast forward to like episode 100 or so and start there. Yeah, no, sure. I'm just kidding. The past episodes are really good too.
Yeah. So anyway, that's it. Also, there's a link in these show notes. Go check that out while you're listening to us, because I don't want you to check out that link after you're over because you might not click on it. But we have a live show that's kind of a live version of this podcast, so to speak, although we have a lot different segments. It's not a news show. We have guests, we have games, we have all kinds of stuff that we do. So that's every other Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 Eastern. And if you're listening to this in real time as the show just came out on, I don't even know what day, March 20th, then it'll be in like 3 days.
Yes.
On Wednesday.
March 23rd, I would assume, right? Yeah.
Yep. And you have to go to culturalmedia.com to the live events page, and then the sign up link is right there. Yeah,
we'll make it like the top link in the show notes. So if you're listening on a player or whatever, you can just hopefully click that link right there and get signed up for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we said, timelines, 1100 CE. I said AD earlier. You kind of go back and forth with those.
I know. I try to like make my brain say CE. I know I've said this before, but I try to make it say CE because I prefer it from a non-religious standpoint when you're talking about dates. But we're so ingrained to say AD that it just like comes out sometimes. So,
well, and the funny thing is we say CE to be non-denominational, basically, but it's still based on the exact same thing.
It totally is. So, maybe it's stupid to try to do it then. Just let it be AD and like move on.
Honestly, the only thing that would help is to go to star dates like Star Trek did. That's why they did it. It's more international and universal. I still like BP a lot, and I feel like switching to that would be great. But that's also hard too. So, but like in 100 years, when people are listening to this podcast, those dates will be off.
Like when exactly. So it's a moving target when you do it that way.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this in 100 years, we're recording in 2022. Hopefully that's still a thing. It might not be. But yeah. So anyway, so timelines in North America. A lot of times we start with an anchor event, something people know about. Although this time we kind of have 2 anchor events.
Well, it's not. I would say it's not really an anchor event. It's just that we were kind of looking at Chaco Canyon. That's what we're going to talk about here in this first segment, because it's such an amazing civilization, all built all around the structures that are left and everything. And we were like, well, what else was going on in the world? And then we like dug a little deeper and we're like, well, actually, like there's a lot of really cool things happening just in North America, just with the ancestral Native American populations in North America. So we're like, all right, cool. Let's just do a timeline to focus on what was happening right here in this one continent, how different they were, how similar, and that kind of thing. So that's what we're doing today.
Like I said, dug a little deeper, as I say in the intro.
I did. I didn't even do it on purpose.
Wow. All right, so Chaco Canyon, we've been there.
Yes, we have.
It's a cool place. We actually
Very cool
worked.
place.
We worked at a site that had Anasazi artifacts. Mm-hmm. We worked on that back in like 2007 or 8 or something like that.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah.
But we were like, what, an hour from
Give or
like
take,
Chaco Canyon proper, like down the dirt road and everything to get there.
Right.
So it was cool.
I do not know, because we were CRM archaeologists, what the site we were working on dated to.
I don't know.
But had it been contemporaneous with Chaco, it would have been what was called a Chacoan outlier, because Chaco was the big influence of the area, which we'll get into in a minute.
I remember not finding very much that was significant. It was an excavation, like a testing.
But we found a lot of that Anasazi black on white, because we came from the East Coast where the pottery is like sand beaten and just kind of like not painted anymore.
Yeah, well, it was never painted; it was decorated, but
still kind of cool in its own right. Well, it could have been painted. It's just like the sand ate it away.
True.
But you get out there and we're just like, look at this pottery we found, and everybody's like, come back to me when you got 100 pieces of it.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, it was all over the place.
Yeah, it's a very, very cool area to work from an archaeological perspective, because you usually have great preservation, and Chaco, of course, is an example of this great preservation.
Yeah. So let's talk about Chaco.
Yeah. So Chaco Canyon was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987.
Which is shockingly late.
It is shockingly late for such a significant site.
Yeah. I mean, we've known about this site for, hundreds of years, really.
Yeah.
Since the 1800s, at the very least. And people have been going there and studying it for at least the past 100 years plus.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I can't believe such an influential and just big site that contains a lot of different things. And maybe it's the fact that they didn't put it all together. I don't know. But it's usually political in what makes something like this.
Yeah.
But it's not like there's oil or something out there that was stopping. I mean, there probably is, but
well, it could be the remoteness of it. Like, if you remember when we went there, it's like an hour down a gravel road, at least the entrance we came in, plus like several more hours to get to any like legit interstate. So it's a long ways out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. So there's easily 4,000 plus prehistoric and historic archaeological sites in the Chacoan area, the Chaco Canyon area.
Like part of the national park. Probably, right? Yeah.
And even more when you look at the outliers, the Chacoan outliers and things like that.
Yeah, totally.
There's well over 10,000 years of human cultural history there. I mean, people have been in this area. It's the southwestern United States. Yeah. And it's a place you can live relatively comfortably all year long. I mean, in the higher elevations, it will get freezing cold and snowing in the higher elevations, but for the most part, you've got places you can go and be.
Yeah, it's not like it's a constant like blizzard, right? Like you might have it every once in a while, but it's very livable year round.
Yeah, like if you live in the Yukon, you got to learn how to live in the snow.
Right, totally.
Or walk 1,000 miles.
Yeah,
something like that. But here, you could just kind of either learn to live with it, get in your buildings and things like that that they did make. Yep. Or just like take off. Yeah. Go someplace warmer. Totally. So I'm sure they vacationed in Mexico.
That's a little ways away, but I'm not going to say no.
This is New Mexico. Why wouldn't they vacation in Old Mexico?
Oh my God, you're so ridiculous.
Anyway, there has been, more research conducted here, more archaeological research in Chaco Canyon and the area of Chaco Canyon than pretty much any other prehistoric district in all of North America.
It's just so so much. There's just so much. And like, take a look at the links that we've provided. And I think the Archaeology Podcast Network has done more episodes across all of our different shows on Chaco Canyon.
I mean, I kind of had to use our search field on the front page just to see what we've talked about, since this is such an important site. Yeah. And we've talked about it a lot.
A lot. So here's one more for the search engine.
So I had to just highlight some of the work that other hosts have done on the show and mentions of Chaco Canyon. So that's pretty cool to have that as a resource. Yeah. But either way, this area, as we said, has been around, 10,000 years. There's been people here. However, the Chaco Canyon that we know and love, the big roundhouses and the big structures, the cities, the pueblos, as you call them, those big things, like Pueblo Bonito is the biggest one. Those things started with the people that I guess started to build it up around the mid-800s, the Anasazi people, the ancestral Puebloan, they call them, or the Anasazi. There's some baggage tied up in both of those terms.
Yeah, like it's names that are given after the fact and that kind of stuff. So, but they're ancestral Puebloan people.
Yeah, they built these great houses, they're called, with up to hundreds of rooms.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, Pueblo Bonito is, I mean, in Spanish, that means, pretty town, but it really is one big structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's not like something with a wall. It's like one big structure that was, 3 acres, 5 stories tall.
Yeah.
And it just was like this monstrosity.
It housed the whole, like, main nucleus of the town, basically, was in it, which is really
everything
cool.
was in there. Yeah. And these things take decades, if not centuries, to fully construct, because it sounds like the construction's never like really done.
Yeah.
They're building onto it. They're modifying it. Things collapse. I mean, that's just what happens. But they're always doing these different things. So, but the architecture here was what's been identified in the area as a specific Chacoan type of architecture. You see it here. You see it in the outlying, the little pueblos in the outlying areas of Chaco. Yeah. There's other towns, so to speak, inside of the canyon, and there's some up on the canyon rim. In fact, there's one. Was it Pueblo Alto or something like that?
Oh, yeah. We hiked up to that one.
Yeah. Like right from there, you can look over the ridge and see Pueblo Bonito.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that if I were running Pueblo Bonito, Pueblo Alto is where like the guardhouse would be, the people the people who lived and were like, hey, here's where you pay the entrance fee to get into Chaco. So,
or the early warning system if they're being invaded or something like that,
And wasn't there, I don't think we wrote about this in our notes, but I remember stairs built into the wall that we couldn't really walk up.
Oh Lord, no! They were like rock climbing holes, basically.
Well, they were from what I understand, there were carved in steps, but also some of the areas that were more sheer, it really was holes that like a wooden step platform would have been put into. Yeah, and then I can't even imagine how many people died on those things.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like they were very goat-like in their ability to like hop around these rocks.
I mean, I feel like some people would have been, but when you start getting more sedentary, I feel like fewer and fewer people get like that. Yeah. So anyway, another cool thing about these structures, the towns, so to speak, I'm just going to call them towns, is that it seems as though they were pointed in significant directions. Right. Like significant, like north, south, east, west kind of thing. There's a lot of archaeoastronomy at Chaco Canyon. Artifacts and rock alignments and petroglyphs and pictographs that are based on astronomical events.
Yeah, and like the placement of the sun and the moon throughout the year and stuff like that. It seems like they really built their structures around that sort of placement. Yeah. One of the reasons why it's on our radar for this timelines is by 1050 AD or so, or CE, 1050 CE, it was a major ceremonial center. Yes. They had canals that would bring in water, that would, help them grow corn, beans, squash, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. They had 200 miles plus of roads extending out from Chaco. And that was the Chacoan Road Network, which if you listen to the Site Bites season 1, it's all about Chaco Canyon. Chaco. Yeah, and it's linked in here, but they talk about one of the guests on Site Bites with Carlton Gover, who was the host of that show, talks about really what these Chacoan roads are. We call them roads because that's what our brain associates a road with. They're these straightish things that are really wide that go out for, hundreds of miles. And we call them roads, but, what were they really used for? So listen to those. Yeah. In the 1100s, later 1100s, the building waned a little bit. People began to move out. The modern Southwest Puebloan tribes right now are descendants of people who lived, or were influenced by Chaco Canyon. Yeah. And what I love about Chaco is that they built this amazing structure and all the people lived there together for the most part. There were outliers and stuff too. Yeah. And you really get this feeling of community from just looking at what remains of the town. And it's hard to get that idea of what the community was like when you're looking at places that don't have such great physical remains left. So I think it's really cool. And I think that by 1100, which is our target date for this episode, they were sort of at like the height of the Chacoan society and what it could be, what it was going to be. Things sort of started on the downslide after that point, or not too long after that point. So that's why we picked it as being what it was at 1100. Right. So, yeah. So this was first kind of brought into archaeological significance when a guy named Richard Wetherill discovered the cliff dwellings around there and told colleagues at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and these guys called the Hyde brothers, who are apparently associated with the AMNH,
Did I say that right? AMNH. Yep.
Yeah.
Went out in the 1890s and did first excavations out there. So they were
early excavations.
Really
then.
early.
Yeah. I mean, usually it's 30s, 40s when people started getting interested, right?
Yeah, and this was getting into, Indiana Jones territory because they basically just snatched a bunch of artifacts and stuff. Enough in one season to fill an entire freight car, a train freight car, and haul it back to New York.
So they're just like probably pulling whole pots out of the ground.
Oh, yeah,
like,
I'm sure
look at this amazing thing and sending it away. Ugh.
Yeah.
It hurts.
And what's interesting about it being set up as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and on the National Register of Historic Places in the 80s is that in 1907, it was set up as Chaco Cultural National Historic Park. That's what it's called now.
Yeah.
So it's been a national park.
So it's had some kind of protection
Well,
for
good
at least
protection.
100 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It just didn't make it into UNESCO until later.
Right. So the black on white pottery mentioned earlier is pretty cool too. That was made, it's called black on white because it's essentially like a white base with like black, geometric designs on it.
Like they do like a slip of white on the outside of the pot and then they paint on it in black.
Yeah, and that was made with a mineral paint that was made by grinding up stones, basically. The mixture was put into water and then painted onto pottery.
Yeah, I think that's what slip means when I use that. It's when it's like a color mixed with water and then you put it paint it on. So, yeah.
They also found cacao residue on some pots, which was the first time this was found basically north of Mexico when they found this in Chaco. So, which just illustrates the vast trade networks that Chaco was part of because you don't grow that there.
No, they definitely were trading in order to get their hands on that.
Yeah. So some quick notes about archaeoastronomy that I really love about Chaco in the last few minutes here. The supernova pictograph. There's a supernova that happened in 1054, and we know that date specifically because the Chinese well documented it. Other cultures, the Greeks, I think, the Romans.
Around the world,
People around the world saw this supernova because it didn't just like pop into existence and go away. It was visible for a little while.
It was an unusual bright light in the sky, and everybody took note of it.
And under this one cliff overhang that we saw when we were going out to, it was like Penasco Blanco or something like that. It was a
long hike.
It was like a 10-mile round trip hike to get out there.
Very long hike.
It was all the way at the end of the canyon. I don't know which end, but if you're looking at Pueblo Bonito, you go left.
Yes.
That's all I remember.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it was all the way out there, but on the way up the stairs, because this was outside the canyon right on the rim, on the way up there is the supernova pictograph, and it's just a red like image of a sunburst, and I think a moon or something like that. That was really cool. There's also the sun dagger petroglyph, which I think is really cool. 2 whorl-shaped kind of like swirly things, carvings behind rock panels. It's called the 3 slab site, but basically the sun shines through this slit in the rocks, and at the solstices, the winter and spring solstice at the very least, at the solstices, it hits these spirals at certain predictable spots, like on the edges, and then throughout the year you can almost mark like where you are in the year where this slit of sunshine is hitting the spiral.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
It was a clock essentially, a calendar.
That's really advanced, really cool.
I know
that's all happening in that late 1000s.
Yeah.
Is 1000s a thing? I'm going to make it a thing. 1000s and 1100s.
1000s. Yeah, sure. But the cool thing is it doesn't just mark the year because it's of the right size and positions that it actually marks an entire 18.6 year lunar excursion cycle, it's called.
Cool.
So the moon kind of travels a little bit in its orientation and how it orbits the Earth. And they were actually recording that at Chaco Canyon.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Why did Chaco collapse? Well, that is one of the big questions. If you ever read Jared Diamond's book on collapse, called Collapse, I mean, it's a little bit contentious, almost not as bad as Guns, Germs, and Steel, but either way, he talks about Chaco and a few other cities and things like that, and areas. But a lot of people think it was more just drought. Yeah.
So there was a 50-year drought that is well documented in this time frame, and it seems that the abandonment of the structures was happening it coincided with the end of this drought or coming to the end of this drought. So it might just be like a lack of resources sort of forced people out. But I do want to stress that it's not as if those people died and were gone. They just left that area and moved to somewhere else. So using the word collapse is really only in reference to the people living in this particular location. They simply moved on and went and lived somewhere else where probably the resources were better. Maybe it was conflict that pushed them out and they went to find a more peaceful living situation. Who knows?
Well, I'm willing to bet they left because they wanted to get their kicks on Route 66 and head straight to Illinois, where we'll talk about Cahokia back in a minute.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to episode 163, hashtag George Russell, of the
Oh my God.
Archaeology Show.
He's just 63.
Just 63, but he's going to be number one. Any Formula One fans out there?
Oh, not this year. Mercedes is not looking good.
Yeah, well, he'll do better anyway. A better car.
Anyway.
Sorry, no more racing talk.
Yeah.
We don't really watch sports ball, but we watch weirdly Formula One.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's not weird. It's Netflix. Thanks,
Yes,
Netflix.
true.
You dropped it in front of our faces and we consumed.
Actually true. You know, as people interested in culture, go watch Drive to Survive on Netflix. We do not an affiliate link here.
Yeah.
It's just it's really interesting watching the dynamic, the international dynamic that takes place, as that hits different areas. But we won't talk about the potential damage it does to places flying around the world with their $1 million cars and stuff.
We're not going to talk about that.
Okay, so Cahokia.
Yeah. Switching topics completely. Let's talk about Cahokia.
The biggest Native American city north of Mexico.
Yes. And again, 1100 is a pretty key time frame for Cahokia because it reaches like a height at that point.
Yeah.
Just like Chaco.
Well, the mayor of Cahokia was like, look at Chaco. We got to step this up.
I mean, there probably was some trade between them because the Chacoan roads went so far. And then there's also a lot of evidence of trade with Cahokian people too, which we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, there might have been trade between them. Who knows? So Cahokia is named after the Cahokia tribe, which is a part of the historic Illinois people. And that would be like where Illinois comes from. They lived there when Europeans arrived, but that does not necessarily mean that they are the people who occupied Cahokia.
Sure.
They might not even be descendants of them. We don't really know. They just are the namesake of the site.
Yeah.
So people began moving into this area in the 600 to 900 time frame. And the culture transitions from like a late woodland to Mississippian culture. That kind of transition is all happening at the same time period.
Yeah, and the woodland time varies, but it generally goes from about 1000 BCE to 1000 CE.
Yeah.
And these time periods, like woodland, Mississippian, they're actually just invented by archaeologists in order to
break things up.
Yeah, they're usually based upon, technology like stone tool technology, building technology. Mm-hmm. What did they do? The woodland is often referred to as also like part of the mound builder era, although that does extend into the Mississippian.
Yeah, like the Mississippians are the ones that are really known as the mound builders, but the woodland
kind of starts in the woodland.
Yeah, the woodland people are the predecessor, right? And like the descendants of them are the ones who actually start doing the whole mound thing, like you get at Cahokia. Mm-hmm. And the Mississippian time period, again, it fluctuates a lot, but that's like around 800 CE to 1600 CE. And that would be right around when like Europeans were arriving, basically.
Yeah, the middle Mississippian, which is at the height of the culture in this time period, is what we're talking about with Cahokia.
Yeah, so Cahokia is one of the most important and largest Mississippian centers. There are other ones, of course. There's Moundville in Alabama, Angel Mounds in Indiana, and Kincaid Site in Illinois. And there's evidence of trade between all of these different sites. So these people were definitely well connected to each other, and all the trade was happening.
Yeah, and there's trade as far out as the Great Lakes to the north, the Gulf Coast to the south.
Yeah.
I mean, that definitely brings them into the southwestern
It's possible.
I mean, maybe they met in the middle or something.
Maybe.
You know, I'm willing to bet people spread out and met in the middle of the country. They would have had other Native American groups to deal with there. But
yeah, but it's a long distance to cover to go from Cahokia to Chaco.
But the thing is, trade networks, they're called networks because you could have traded 20 miles outside of Cahokia.
Oh, true.
And then 20 miles outside of that.
Yeah.
And depending on the rarity or the preciousness of the item being traded, I would imagine like commodities like food were not traded super far,
right?
Unless it was a precious one that was hard to find, like cacao.
Yeah,
it'd be something to find cacao in Cahokia.
Yeah.
I would make a coffee shop called that the Cahokia Cacao. Cahokia Cacao Cafe.
Oh, wow, you can't even say that. So
Cahokia Cacao Cafe.
Neither can your customers.
That's why we collapsed.
Yeah.
All right.
So one of the main products that Cahokia was exporting, if you will, is the Mill Creek chert. It was just a super valuable type of chert. It made really amazing tools and it was highly valued and they controlled it. So therefore they could, use it as trade.
Yeah, chert is chert kind of around the world.
Yeah.
But the colors that you get in chert are very, very dynamic and dependent on the mineral content of the areas in which the chert formed geologically. So you can have some chert that's just like all white. You can have chert that's like all black, all brown, but you can have chert that's like 50 different colors if you look at it right.
Yeah, and some is finer and some is grittier too. So like having a really good, really fine source that naps really well is key for making really good, really strong tools.
Yeah, it's like some of the stuff becomes precious and some doesn't. It's like carbon.
Yeah.
Nobody wants carbon. That comes out of your fire. But if you press it hard enough, it becomes a diamond.
Yeah, right.
And now we want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a new religious movement happening around 1050. And then also there were new ways of living and organizing the society. And this is all like happening at the same time. And sort of all these changes coming together are what but helped Cahokia grow into the center that it became.
Yeah, one of the guests of the Life in Ruins podcast, just an episode or two ago from when you're listening to this, they had a guest on who has worked at Cahokia. And one of the segments, I think the second segment of that show, she talked extensively about Cahokia. Yeah. So it was pretty interesting to listen to.
Yeah, definitely a good one to listen to. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, the cool thing about this place, I mean, you wouldn't know it if you've ever been to Cahokia because you can, if you're standing on the top of the largest mound, which is called Monk's Mound, which you can do, you can see the St. Louis Arch. Yeah. Yeah, we did it. Now, I don't remember when we went up in the Arch being able to see Monk's Mound because it really is just kind of a grassy hill.
Yeah, it's a grass-covered hill, so...
Probably with binoculars you could see it, but...
You'd have to know where to look and what you're looking at.
Yeah, with the naked eye, it kind of just blends into the landscape.
Yeah.
But there were, you've got huge St. Louis right there. It's just hard to imagine a big city on the other side of the river. Yeah. But 30 to 40,000 people lived in this metropolis of Cahokia. That's amazing.
It's amazing. It was the biggest city north of Mexico, like we said.
How do they handle like waste and garbage?
I know.
And but we think that. Yeah. Now people have to go to the bathroom. That's something you're just going to have to deal with. Yeah. But garbage in the sense of that, like when COVID first started happening in places like New York, garbage was piling up in the streets because we throw everything away. Yeah. But back in the day, that wasn't common.
Right. I didn't even think about that, but there's no like packaging to throw away. Like your packaging is the husk around the nut that you're eating. You burn that.
You're reusing. You have many uses for the things that you're using. There's very little things I think that would just be outright thrown away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even pottery in a lot of these places is once it's done, it may be used for other things, the pieces of it, or it may be just crushed up and now it's basically it's under your feet.
Or totally.
I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like we talked a couple episodes ago, they use fragments of sherds to teach their children how to write in whatever town that was in somewhere in the Middle East. So they find uses. These prehistoric peoples would find uses for everything. I think there's very little trash.
Yeah. There were in the larger Cahokian area there, and there was a fence around the whole thing. I think that's been shown archaeologically.
Yes, there definitely was.
Yeah. But there was about 120 mounds, give or take, spread across an area that is about 6 square miles. Yep. So even looking at the 30 to 40,000 people in 6 square miles, that's a pretty high population density.
And like we said, the largest was Monk's Mound. It faced south. It was 100 feet high, 951 feet long, and 836 feet wide, and covers 13.8 acres. It's massive.
What's insane about the fact that there's so many mounds and big mounds like this one. Now, this was the biggest one. That doesn't mean all the rest were tiny. There were some other equally large mounds, just not as big. But the crazy thing is, these mounds, they took up so much space, and
Yeah.
you didn't live inside of them. They're big piles of dirt.
Yeah. And they were building, there's layers on layers on layers. So like the bigger the mound got, it almost just means it's older because they were just putting another layer on top of it. They had to make the base bigger and they had to put another layer on top of it to keep building up, which is what they did in a lot of cases.
Right. I mean, it was almost guaranteed, even if we didn't know anything about cultures or anything else. And this is the first thing we ever studied, because you can't live inside of these things. They're not like residential or even palace type structures. The only reason you would keep building higher and higher and higher is religious prestige or like political prestige.
Yeah, like you want to bump yourself up higher than the people around you. Yeah.
So like powerful families would probably had a flat, like a structure on top of the flat top of these mounds.
Yeah.
And they would just, build and build and build.
Yeah, totally. They speculate that on top of Monk's Mound was another structure that would have added another 50 feet.
That's huge.
Yeah, it was just massive.
And then the cell antenna on top of that. There's always an antenna on top of the highest thing.
Maybe there's like a torch or something. Well, actually, I don't know. That might have been a fire danger.
I mean, historically, that little side note, because we like to take tangents on this show. I just saw an article back when it was first built. The Eiffel Tower in Paris was the tallest man-made structure in the world. They just added, it's no longer that anymore, but they just added another 50 feet to it or something like that because they put another antenna on top of the antenna structure that's on there. Yeah, and they had to lift it up there with a helicopter.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway,
yeah,
the base of the mound was larger than the base of the pyramid at Giza.
Yeah, that just puts it into perspective. Like you can see in your mind how big those pyramids are. This was just as big.
Yeah. So some of these mounds were probably not just for elevating the people.
Yeah. And living on.
Yeah. They were also living in the afterlife. So Mound 72, it's called, was a burial mound. We know that for sure.
Yeah. And it definitely contains the remains of at least one important leader. And they know that because they found the body of, I think, of like a 40-ish-year-old man who's buried on a bed of more than 20,000 marine shell disc beads that are arranged in the shape of a falcon.
Where do those beads come from? Marine shell.
Well, they're right on the Mississippi, so maybe.
I mean, there are obviously freshwater shells.
Yeah,
but I just didn't conceive of the fact that there could have been like that many, that it was a resource.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, being that close to such a large river, they probably could get access to a fair amount, but 20,000 of them? That's crazy.
Well, and right there in the St. Louis area, I bet a lot washed in from the Great Lakes as well.
Oh, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's Great Lake tribute. Mississippi doesn't go up into the Great Lakes, but there are tributaries that probably hit the Mississippi that do go up into the Great Lakes. I'd have to look at that for sure, but yeah. Anyway, they found in this same mound with that leader approximately 250 other burials in that mound.
Yeah.
Some of which had evidence that they could be sacrifices.
Yeah. Some of them look like they might have been buried alive. They're basing this on the shape of their fingers and saying that it looked like they were trying to claw their way out.
Had a real Pompeii-esque image to them, did they sometimes? Screaming in pain? I have
a little bit of skepticism about that because as the flesh decomposes away, like the bones just sort of like fall.
Curves things and dries and...
Yeah, and like there's soil pressing down on it. And it just like I don't know if I'd put too much stock into the shape of the bones that were left behind, but who knows, maybe.
I also 100% believe that 1,000 years ago they were burying people alive.
Yeah, no, like totally that could happen, especially with a leader that they used 20,000 shells to make a falcon image to lay him to rest on.
Right.
I mean, clearly this dude was important, so
I better be laid to rest on a falcon image as well. Like, that's what I want.
I'm going to put you in a boat and light you on fire and push you out to sea.
That'd actually be kind of cool. I want to be not quite dead when that happens, so I can just die on a boat.
Oh, so you want me to murder you?
That's fine. I mean, I'm going to die.
That's actual murder.
Is it actually murder or euthanasia?
Oh.
By the way, my brother doesn't listen to this, but I remember him saying one time in college, when he was in college, he was like, man, why is everybody always talking about the kids in Asia? I just don't understand. Why? I'll never forget him saying that.
Oh my God. It's one of those things that like you don't know you're wrong about until you say it out loud and then you're like, oh shit.
He also visited me when I was in North Dakota one time and wondered why the twin cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, he's like, why do they put the state after the city or something like that? I don't know what it was.
Oh my God.
It was weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, they had some pretty good technology here, as you would imagine, for 40,000 people. They were figuring some stuff out. They had a copper workshop, which is pretty cool.
So they're working in metal. Obviously, that's amazing.
Yep. They were competing with England in their structures by putting up large hinges, if you will.
Oh, like a wood hinge?
A wood hinge.
No, this is really cool. And the guests that the Life in Ruins had on talked about this a little bit, but there's a wood hinge, which is basically a large timber circle. And there is evidence that they were taking the smaller posts out and replacing them with larger posts.
Bigger and bigger wood hinges.
Yeah. Just replacing them with bigger ones.
Yeah. So as with all big cities in the past, it was eventually, unless you're, like in Rome or Greece, which just stay big cities.
Just still is.
But
ebbs and flows, though, right?
Ebbs and flows, yeah. But there's a lot of land out here and not as many people. So at that time, things could be abandoned if no longer used. Still kind of surprises me, though. I feel like when something like this is abandoned, the reason people don't come back, it's probably largely spiritual. It's like maybe the area is seen as cursed or bad luck or something. I don't really know, and I don't think we will know. But
because to abandon a place that is built up so well and presumably easy to live in, because there are so many structures and everything, and the infrastructure is there.
Well, and I always wonder, if somebody just walking by 300 years later, some family that's coming down from somewhere that's never even heard of or seen Cahokia walks by and goes, what in the actual hell is going on here?
Right.
I'm going to live here.
Yeah.
I'm going to put my house on the top of that hill.
Yeah, totally.
I imagine that did happen, but just not to the significance of a city that we can see in the archaeological record. So, but anyway, by the mid 1350s, it was basically abandoned.
Yeah.
We'll never know the exact reasons, and people say the usual things like environmental reasons like flooding or drought, or human like outside conflict or political issues. But again, if it were not something spooky, I imagine people would have just come back. And one of the things I heard mentioned, I think from that guest on the Life in Ruins podcast in the last episode, was that there seems to be evidence of like a radical religious movement that actually kind of tore the whole society down and then never rebuilt it.
And that would totally do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's definitely a reason for people to leave. So and like we have mentioned before, there was definitely like a large global drought kind of going on in the 1300s, so that might have helped contribute to them leaving. It's impossible to say, really, but again, we're not going to use the word collapse because the people just left and went somewhere else. Right. They were not gone.
I mean, the city kind of collapsed, but the people did not.
Exactly.
Yeah. So much like St. Louis today. Anyway, it's been... The whole area of Cahokia was bought by the state of Illinois in 1923. I'd like to be the family that sold that to them. What have you guys done with your life? I've sold Cahokia, whatever. Who owned that to begin with?
I'm not sure who they bought it from.
On some land grab in the 1800s was I'll take that.
Yeah.
But it became a national landmark in 1964 and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1966. By 1982, it had become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So all sorts of protections.
Yep. And
to that.
Archaeology-wise, there's been some excavations to protect it when various different things like erosion or landslides or whatever, like sliding of the mountains, are endangering it. But there hasn't been a whole lot of excavation in the last 100 years because it's mostly really about preserving it rather than excavating it.
All right, well, we're going to use some of those Cahokian road networks. Head on back down Route 66 to the southwest and talk about the Hohokam. Back in a minute.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Welcome back to the third and final segment of episode 163 of the Archaeology Show. We're talking about timelines 1100 CE, with the Common Era, that means, in North America. If you're in present day, that is, almost 1,000 years ago?
Yeah, close to.
Yeah, so, wait, that's more than 1,000 years ago. What year is it now? 2022.
2022.
So
you're really struggling with this.
So 1100 was 922 years ago.
Correct.
BP.
Yep.
British Petroleum. No. Okay, so the Hohokam. We're going to talk about them.
Over there.
I know. If you've ever heard the CRM Archaeology podcast, you've heard Bill White say lots of things about the Hohokam because he worked in Arizona.
Did he study them? Oh,
well,
cool.
he worked in Arizona.
Oh, okay.
If you're an Arizona CRM archaeologist, he's like, you can't walk 3 feet without stepping on a Hohokam village.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and this is in a similar region as Chaco, but it was pretty far away. And at the same time, they sort of had their different things going on, which is why we decided to talk about Hohokam as our third site.
I mean, we talked about, Chaco trading with Cahokia speculatively. I mean, they definitely would have traded with these guys.
They definitely did.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some influence from the ancestral Puebloan.
All this is staying in, by the way.
No, it's not. You better take it out.
Ancestral Puebloan. That's a hard word to say. The old Sidian.
I'm done.
The old Townians.
The Anasazi people definitely were influencing the Hohokam by the end of their society. So where we're talking about here, it's southwestern, primarily it's a southwestern culture and primarily the southern half of Arizona and some of the top of or the northern part of Mexico as well.
That's why a lot of Tucson is Hohokam sites.
Yes,
things
exactly.
Like that.
Yeah. And it was mostly found along the Gila and Salt rivers.
So we're looking at around 200 CE to 1400 CE and divided into 4 periods that archaeologists and historians have called the Pioneer, Colonial, Sedentary, and Classic. So the sedentary period is about 975 to 1150. That fits within our timelines area here. Mm-hmm. And that is the height of geographic occupation, meaning that's as far out as they, where they were spread out the furthest. And likely, obviously, the highest population size as well to be able to cover that much area.
Mm-hmm. But to be clear, the Hohokam people definitely are a slightly earlier group than the Chaco and the Cahokian people were. Like they're definitely coming to the end by the 1100s. So
and we're mostly talking about the people here, unlike Chaco and Cahokia, where we're really talking about some big cities and living areas.
Yeah,
this is more of a larger culture that was in an area but had a similar rise and fall, so to speak.
There's not like a really, really great set of ruins that we can point you to that represent this time period. There are other time periods, but not this one. And that's partly because they lived in small-ish villages, and and a lot of the structures were just like simple pit houses, which you don't get the big imposing structures or mounds or whatever like you see in other cultures.
So similar to some of the Mayan structures, at some point they began building some platforms and ball courts. We saw the ball courts at Chichen Itza.
It looks like they were pretty similar to that, so that's pretty cool.
Well, that ball court at Chichen Itza was like an Olympic stadium compared to...
Yes, right. The idea behind it is similar. Yeah, not that they were necessarily influenced by the Mayan. They might have been. They were just to the south, but much earlier. So who knows? But yeah.
And interestingly, also around 1100, this community was basically at its peak if you measure peaks in terms of, say, population size.
Yeah, like population size, They had extensive canal systems in order to produce tobacco and agave. So that was like their main products that they were making. So if you did want to go and visit a site, well, you can't. So Snaketown was probably the largest settlement. It had about 1,000 to 3,000 people at its height. And like I said, this was a much smaller group of people, and that would have been a much smaller town, though still rather sizable for a prehistoric people. And Snaketown is on the Gila River. It's in the Hohokam Pima National Monument near Santan, Arizona, which is like 30 miles southeast of Phoenix. And the reason why I said you can't go see it is because that national monument is part of the Gila River Indian community, and it is not open to the public.
Right.
They've chosen to keep it closed, and I'm not even sure they publicize like the actual location of the site because they don't want people sneaking in, and they just have chosen to protect it. Okay. In fact, there's nothing to see on the surface. I saw a couple pictures of it. They kind of look like those site overview pictures that you take that are just like a wide view of land and just a skinny little piece of sky, and it's just like sagebrush and vegetation.
Right.
So yeah, the site itself is probably just completely buried still, and there's probably a lot to find there if it were to be excavated, but that's not something that they have chosen to do.
Yeah.
We do know that it was a large site and that it covered probably around 250 acres at its maximum extent. It was first excavated in 1934 and then again from 1964 to 65. And that is the only excavations that have happened there. And like I said, there's nothing visible on the surface in part because it was completely reburied after the last excavations. It was completely backfilled. All the dirt was re-added. So the site, when it was excavated in the 60s, they found it to contain 60 midden mounds and a central plaza with 2 oval-shaped fields or ball courts, which is different from what we saw down in Mexico. Those were like rectangular ball courts, and these are oval. So I suppose they were probably playing a different game or something, but that is pretty cool. So, sort of the Hohokam spin on the ball court idea. Like
the difference between a pool table over here and a pool table in England.
What is the difference?
They're much bigger and they're called snooker tables.
Oh, really?
But it's basically pool.
Okay.
But it's just like it's like an evolution of the game.
Yeah. Okay. So it does seem like this site was quickly abandoned and probably around 1100. And there is some evidence of fire damage, like a lot of the structures. So that it could have just been a fire that pushed everybody out. But it could have been because of drought. Maybe the drought contributed to the fire if they didn't have enough water to battle a fire situation, who knows? Yeah. So the Hohokam ceramics are defined by a distinct plain category, a red category, and then a decorated buffware tradition. And that is pretty different from what you see up in Chaco and the Anasazi tradition, which is the black on white thing going on up there. So this is definitely different and very specific to this area. Yeah. And just a quick notes about what happened to the people themselves. They were heavily influenced by the Anasazi people around like 1300-ish. And they started building structures at that time. Like there's one called Casa Grande Ruins, which are near Tucson.
Which we should have gone to.
I know we didn't have a chance to go see it, but like it's right off the interstate. I think you can get there pretty easily. And that would be an example of those. They were built in like the 1300s. So the population as it was around 1100, which is what we're talking about, which is when that Snaketown site was at its height. It just sort of shifted at a certain point and became very influenced by the Chaco ancestral Puebloan people. They just had a heavy influence, and it became not a combined society, but a society that was becoming there was more conformity because of the influence that was happening there. Yeah. And then most Hohokam sites are abandoned by the 1450s, and that's that. Yeah. So let's talk real quick at the end of this segment here. And by the way, don't turn this off because for members, we do have a bonus segment coming up. So check out your bonus pages over at ArchPodNet.com/members. You can see your access to your bonus pages there. Are we saying what we're talking about in the bonus segment? We're going to talk about the prehistory of the Pacific Northwest. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's going to be pretty cool. Anyway, I've been trying to look up because I had some knowledge that I was trying to just solidify here. And it's really interesting. There is a climactic anomaly that took place around 950 to 1250 in most of the world called the medieval warm period. And it is a time when, the climate in North America was warmer than usual, which would have caused droughts, which would have caused, resource use intensification because things were declining, like, tree growth and things like that as the droughts got pretty significant. Things were cooler, however, in like the North Atlantic and some other places. And it was just, the temperature was generally increased, though, in the latitudes that we're talking about here. Now, that was followed by a cooling period as well, which people seem to be able to survive a little better because, you still have water and food. Yeah. It's just colder. It's just a little chillier. Yeah. They actually call it was such a dip in temperature, they call it the Little Ice Age. Yeah. And that goes from, 1400, give or take, to the early 1800s. And then, of course, in the last 100 years, it hockey sticks, if you've ever heard people talk about that. If you don't believe anything about like human generated climate change, all you have to do is look at the temperature scales. They're so consistent, and like a half a degree Celsius drop, or climb, we call it a warming period. Yeah. And then we got a 0 to half drop, and we call it an ice age. Well, it's gone up over a degree. Twice that, if not more than that, in the last 100 years. And it's directly related to human activities.
Yeah, and initially to industrialization, but then all the other things we've done since then. So
yeah, but what's really interesting about that is that warming period that you're talking about. It's definitely what a lot of scientists or archaeologists cite as potential reasons why these different cities were abandoned at the times that they were.
Yeah. Because
it might have caused drought in the area, because that half a degree was enough that it would, mess with their water sources or whatever. And obviously the people, it was a resource thing, right? Like maybe they didn't want to leave Pueblo Bonito or Cahokia, Monk's Mountain. Maybe they didn't want to leave those places, but they had to because the resources were gone because there was drought, and they had to go find what they needed to survive somewhere else. It makes sense to me.
I mean, when you got that many people living in one spot, it's just, it's hard to...
It's a drag on the environment. Yeah.
What surprises me is like Cahokia. I mean, if you've ever been in that area, it's relatively... I mean, there's forests, there's
very green.
There's rivers. I'm like, even if you're in a pretty bad drought period, is there really fewer animals and stuff? I mean, there would be, but I feel like the ability to eat and find food would have been not as bad during a droughting period.
Well, and that's why for Cahokia specifically, the religious shift does make sense as one of the reasons why the city was abandoned. So that makes sense.
Right. And in an era across the planet when people are really aligning religious intensification, like religious practice, with directly aligned with like crop growth and the weather and things like that. Like if you don't sacrifice enough, whatever, the weather's going to be bad.
Right.
Or if you're a terrible leader, then, we're going to get a new leader in there because that'll make the weather better because the gods like the new leader better.
Right.
So when you have this medieval warming period across the planet where droughts are happening, you're going to have people going, either new religion because the old religion is causing us to, they're taking away our lives and our livelihoods because we're not, they don't like us. So we're going to get rid of this old religion, or the people in charge of that religion. So, I mean, you just see that during this time period. I mean, literally across the entire planet.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's crazy.
Yep.
All right, well, we're going to call it for this episode. Please go over to culturomedia.com. The link is in the show notes, actually, to sign up for this thing. But if you want to see all the other live events we have, go to culturomedia.com and click on the live events page. It's right there in the middle. There's only 3 links on that page. Click on the live events one, and you can see the link and a little bit of details about the show that we have coming up this Wednesday as you're listening to this in real time. And if you ever missed a live show, because we had to pick a consistent day and time for this, but if you ever missed a live show, again, if you're a member of the APN, you can see it for free. For your membership cost, which is only $7.99 a month, or less if you buy it annually. I think it's 25% off if you get the annual one. So that's actually a pretty good deal. I mean, we just upped our Netflix to like $16 a month. So I mean, I know we don't have the content, but seriously.
Yeah.
But anyway, so go check that out. And for everybody else that is a current member, then head over to your member pages and you can listen to our bonus segment 4 on the prehistory of the Pacific Northwest. All right. So with that, thanks for listening. Go check out our member pages, archpodnet.com/members. Please join us. Help us keep these things going. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.archpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArchPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals. That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
.com.